Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome to Idioms About Books. My name is Charles, and I get the privilege of being your host for today. I am one of the Tutlo tutors here at the platform, and I'm one of our webinar hosts, which is why you see me here today. So I just want to wish you all such an amazing Thursday evening whether you are watching us live or you're watching the recording of today's webinar. It's awesome to be with you here. And as we're going to give maybe a minute or two for people to join us, I would like to kindly ask if you could just let me know how our connection is by saying something in our chat. You can say hi, hello, yes, I can hear you, or maybe even let me know, where are you joining us from today? What city, country, maybe even if you're in the office or at home, whatever it is. This is just a fun way to be able to make sure everything is okay with today's connection. And as you are letting me know where you are joining us from, I will let you know that I am joining you from my country of the Philippines. We are a Southeastern Asian country located here on the map on your screen. So if you enjoy things such as traveling, swimming, snorkeling, well, I would suggest to add the Philippines on your travel bucket list, as pictured on the top right side of your screen is an example of some of the activities that you can do when you travel here. So if you love nature, you love tropical islands and swimming, maybe add the Philippines to that bucket list of yours. Now, so far, it seems that everything is okay with today's connection. That's great to hear. If there are any problems during the webinar, please don't hesitate to let me know. But let's go ahead. Let's talk about what to expect with today's topic. So, of course, since we're talking about idioms with books, we're going to spend some time today learning what idioms are. So whether if this is your first time learning about idioms or you're an idioms expert, this will be the top time during today's topic where we'll just break down simply what an idiom is, how to understand it, and those kinds of things. And along with that, we're going to talk about idioms connected to books once we get to that stage. So we're going to connect the idea of idioms, and we'll use the idioms today with books, learn how to use them in sentences, practice making some small changes, and hopefully learn to understand how some changes are acceptable and how to avoid making mistakes. Now, the last thing I'll remind you of is how long we'll be here. Our chat is open during our webinar. Make comments about what we're learning as we're going to be together for the next half hour. So let's get started. Of course, since today we're talking about what an idiom is, let me explain it for you. An idiom is considered a phrase that has a non-literal meaning attached to the phrase. So what do we mean by that? What do we mean by non-literal? Well, when we look at something that is literal, it just means what it means. For example, if I say the word run, it means to run. If I say eat, it means to eat. That's what it means. Because as you learn a language, every word has a meaning. Every word has a definition. And they are considered literal definitions or a literal meaning. However, the thing about idioms is that it's kind of the opposite in some ways. It's not literal. So when we look at the words or the phrase in general, we have to understand that oftentimes the meaning is not from the words that we see on the screen or in the book or that we hear, whatever it is. So as we go into today's topic and today's terms, please take it with a grain of salt, as sometimes the definition is not going to make sense. So that's how you have to learn idioms. you have to take the time to actually learn what they mean because they have non-literal meanings. Let's look at an example. One of my favorite idioms, it's raining cats and dogs. When somebody says that it's raining cats and dogs, somebody is saying that it's raining hard. That kind of is strange, right? Because if you have the literal meaning of raining cats and dogs, it means that there are cats and dogs falling from the sky, right? But because it's non-literal, maybe almost metaphorical in some ways, we have to understand that it just means that it's raining quite hard. So before we continue, let's take some time. Let me know in the chat, what are some examples of idioms that you know? That way we'll be able to maybe even learn some new idioms, as it would be quite fun. So let me know in the chat, what are some of the idioms that you are already familiar with? For example, Greg said in the chat, do not judge a book by its cover. That's an example of an idiom because it has that non-literal meaning, which we'll explore later on. But go ahead, let me know in the chat, does anybody else have something to add when it comes to different idioms that you're already familiar with? So I'll give some time. I see some answers. Somebody says bookworms are, yeah, exactly. Because worms are an animal. So a bookworm, you think, okay, it's an animal connected to books. But no, a bookworm is somebody who likes to read. Exactly. Somebody also said the game is not worth the candle. Exactly. So as you're seeing that these are all different examples of different phrases, different sayings. Some are short, some are a bit longer, but they're all connected by having that non-literal meaning, right? Like be as an open book that Ella said. Yes, these are all perfect examples. So as we take our time over the next 20 or so minutes with what we have left, we're going to go over what an idiom with books means, go over how to use it in sentences, and practice together. So I encourage you, if you have a notebook or some way to take down notes, go ahead and take them down. And like what a couple people have mentioned in the chat, there's a very famous idiom with books, and that is the idea of being an open book. A person who is an open book is a person who never hides anything. They are very open, they don't hide secrets, they don't keep things from their friends or their loved ones. They are willing to share information. They are an open book. Like, for example, in a sentence, I can say, Justin has always been an open book to me. It just means Justin has always been a person who never hides anything from me. And as you can say, there are just basically creative ways of saying something simple. Because I can say, Justin has always been a person who never hides anything from me. That's completely acceptable. That's a fine sentence, but that's the purpose of idioms. It makes it a lot more creative, where I can say, Justin has always been an open book to me. And always keep in mind, whenever I am using an article next to open book, you say un, because open begins with O, right? So you have to use un. So keep in mind, quite a simple one, like a bunch of people mentioned in the chat. Yes, an open book. Let's keep going. And that is to balance the books. Number two, if you balance the books, it just means you manage the money to make everything line up properly. So if you work in accounting or you know anyone who works in accounting, these people balance the books. These are the people that go ahead and manage the money. What money was made, what money was spent, how much did you pay for your rent of the office, how much did you pay in taxes, how much did you make from sales, whatever it is. If you're balancing the books, you're basically balancing the ledger just to make sure everything lines up correctly. Like, for example, somebody can say in a sentence, I have to balance the books at the end of the month. I have to go ahead and manage the money books, make sure everything is explained properly and easily understandable. You have to balance the books because you're keeping everything level, right? That's a balance when things are level, right? Your expenses and your income, everything's there. However, the opposite of balancing the books is you cook the books. When you cook the books, you lie on a financial ledger in order to gain money. Like for example, instead of keeping everything balanced, maybe this one has some fake numbers, so you're able to make a little bit more money, or you're avoiding certain things by cooking the books. And like you can say, he was in trouble for cooking the books. So that's one thing to note. If you look at the word cooking, right, that changed from cook to cooking. There are some times where idioms can function as verbs, right? They're functioning as the action, like cooking the books or balancing the books. And the same rule applies in these situations as it would with normal grammar tenses. We have to go ahead and adjust it to make sure it matches the rest of our sentence, right? So you go to cooking the books, cooked the books, will cook the books, balancing, balanced, will balance, whatever it is. Whenever the idiom functions in that role, you have to be able to adjust it accordingly to what is needed. So keep that in mind. Cooking the books is the opposite from balancing the books. And we'll take a look at another idiom someone mentioned in the chat, and that's judging a book by its cover. And that means to judge something based off appearance. This is where, for example, stereotypes come in. If a person looks a certain way, if something is a certain way, someone's a certain nationality, and you judge them based off that appearance, you are judging a book by its cover. And the opposite is what someone mentioned in the chat. There's a very popular phrase that says, don't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge based off appearances. Just because someone dresses a certain way or looks a certain way doesn't mean they behave that way. Like, for example, in a sentence, it can say, he feels like he gets judged like a book by its cover. He feels like he gets judged based off his appearances. So we're about halfway. Let's keep going. Our next idiom is to crack open a book. And to crack open a book simply means to begin the study or to begin to read your assignment. Like for example, maybe you have a reading assignment for school, or even you can change it in context and just crack open a book by beginning to read. Maybe you have a book on your to be read list, so you have to crack open the book. Begin. Like for example, if somebody has to read a book for school, you can say, I have to crack open a book soon. I have to begin reading soon for maybe an exam or studying, whatever it is. You crack open a book by beginning to read or to study. And there can be people who always have their nose in a book, people who are oblivious to what happens because of reading too much. So maybe they're in a group setting, or maybe it's just somebody like a friend or a family member. They don't pay attention to much of what's happening around them because they're always reading. They have their nose in a book, right? Like maybe they're at the family dinner table and the family is talking about something, and this person gets asked a question, but they have no idea what to say because they had their nose in their book and they were oblivious to what happened. Like I can say he always has his nose in a book. He always is oblivious to what happens to him around him because he is reading. So we still have a few more to go over. Let's go ahead. Our next one is to do things by the book. If you do things by the book, you are just doing something by following the rules and the guidelines. Typically, when you do something, there is what we call a rule book, right? So if you do something by the book, you are doing something by following the rules and the guidelines word for word or point for point, right? You're not skipping corners, you're not doing anything. that you're not supposed to be doing. You're doing things by the book. Like you can say, it is important to do things by the book. It is important to be reading the rules and following the rules, not just knowing them, but following them. Next, we'll learn is to read someone like a book. And that means to understand a person so well, you are knowing what they are thinking at the moment, right? Maybe it could be a best friend, a partner, a family member, whatever it is. And just based off their expressions or based off certain situations, you know how they would behave or you know what they're thinking. So you can read them like a book. Like in a sentence, you can say, he can read his wife like a book. He can read his wife maybe body language or what she's thinking just because he knows her so well. And we still got one more to learn, and that is to use every trick in the book. If you are going ahead and using every trick in the book, it means that you tried everything possible. So maybe you have a problem that you're trying to solve, or maybe there's a situation that you're trying to adjust to, and you're trying to find a way to solve it, but you can't. But you tried everything in the book. You tried everything possible, right? Or maybe you're looking for a new job or a new position, and you are unable to find one. You tried everything possible. You tried using every trick in the book. So one thing to note though, whenever we use the idiom, you use every trick in the book, it means you already tried. The only time you will say something such as, he will try every trick in the book, that's before he did something. But typically, if you said he used every trick in the book, that means that it already happened. All of his trying, all of his effort. All right? So before we continue to practice some of these idioms, just remember what we've learned so far in the past few minutes together. We've talked about an open book, balancing the book, and the opposite of that is cooking the books, judging a book by its cover, cracking open a book, having your nose in the book, doing things by the book, and reading someone like a book. And that's how these idioms are connected to books, right? Because a lot of them use the term book. So let's go ahead and make sure we know how to use these based off context. For example, let's go ahead, look at number 1. On your screen, you have an incomplete sentence, and you have 2 options from what we learned. Please let me know in the chat, which of the 2 options do you think is the correct option based off what we've learned today? He was arrested for cooking the books or balancing the books. I'll give everyone, let's say maybe 10, 15 seconds. Let me know what you think is the proper answer here. Do you get arrested for cooking or balancing the books? Let me know. Again, these are 2 similar terms because they both are connected to finance and accounting. One of them is illegal, which you get arrested for. And I see your answers in the chat. Thank you for participating and let me know. Yes, the answer should be cooking the books. Because remember, if you're cooking the books, you're lying on a financial ledger in order to make money, which is against the law. It is not by the book. You're breaking the rules, so it's not by the book. So you're cooking the books. And same thing, cook the books, adjusted properly in this context would be cooking the books. Now, let's try our next one. Getting him to talk is so difficult. He is such a blank book. And we have 2 options, closed and open. Let me know in the chat, again, what do you think is the correct answer? If getting him to talk is such a difficult task, is he a closed book or an open book? So again, I'll give, let's say 15 seconds, think it through. What do you think? If somebody and getting them to talk is very difficult and it's hard to have those things, is somebody a closed book or is somebody a bit of an open book? Same thing applies. Let me know what you think in the chat. Do you talk to them as a closed book or you talk to them as they are an open book? I see your answers in the chat. Thank you all for participating and making this a fun exercise. Yes, it should be closed book. Why is that? Because remember, if we looked at it earlier before, an open book is a person who is willing to talk, share information, they don't hide anything. However, if you switch it to the opposite of that, that is a person who's a bit of a closed book. They are a person who maybe doesn't like to talk, they don't like sharing things. So therefore, they are a closed book. So that's why it's getting them difficult to talk. So that's in essence also a new idiom to learn. Open book, a person who's willing to talk, share information, all those kinds of things. And you have a closed book, which is a person who does not like to do that. They're opposites. So keep that in mind. Whenever you hear those terms like open book, closed book, sometimes it literally means a book that is closed, but if it's an idiom, you know what it means. So keep in mind a few things that we've learned today. Remember how to understand idioms. If you're trying to understand what an idiom is, you simply have to learn them because they have those non-literal meanings. And there are a bunch of idioms to learn. And today we focus on books, but there are a few things that some people mentioned earlier at the beginning of our lesson in our chat. There are also things like raining cats and dogs, so many useful, colorful expressions. And again, like I said earlier, there are simple ways to say things that idioms use. But in order to advance your English skills, and when you go and watch movies, read books, all those kinds of things, idioms are actually a very popular thing that are used all the time. So remember, what are the idioms we have today with books? A quick recap: an open book, a person who is open, willing to share, and the opposite of them is a closed book. You have balancing the books, which is managing money in a ledger. And if you lie on it, you cook the books. If you judge something based off appearance, you judge a book based off its cover. If you're beginning to read and to study, you crack open a book. If you're always reading and oblivious to what happens, your nose is in the book. If you follow the rules, you're doing things by the book. If you know someone so well, you read them like a book. And if you tried everything, you used every trick in the book. And of course, remember, if an idiom functions as a verb, you have to be able to change the verb part just like you would in normal situations. The rest of the idiom stays the same. So for example, like cook becomes cooking, right? Or balance becomes balanced, whatever it's needed, but the rest of the idiom stays the same. And we want to make sure that all of your questions are answered. So if anyone has a question at all, please don't hesitate. Go ahead and ask it in the chat. And of course, I will do my best to answer your questions. So please don't hesitate. There's no wrong question to ask. If there's something you need some clarification on, or you just want to ask a certain question, our chat is open for you. And as we are waiting for any possible questions, please don't go anywhere. We just have a poll that we would really appreciate your feedback on. So it's on your screen. There are two questions. The first is, did you find today's webinar useful? Of course, that is our goal here, to provide you with useful learning alternatives on the platform. And would you like to join us again for a similar event in the future? We love doing these webinars for you. We love engaging with you. And if these are topics that you enjoy, then we'll continue to provide them for you. We also do alternative topics like general English, business English, grammar, and so much more. So if you want to take a look at the rest of our webinar list, don't hesitate to do so. And we would love to see you there. And who knows, maybe we'll see each other in a future webinar again. I don't see any questions, so we'll go ahead and we'll wrap up. But before we do, I hope you can check us out on social media. We are present on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We post content on our social media to keep you up to date about things that are happening at the platform. We post some fun facts, some learning tips, and so much more. Until next time, everyone, thank you for joining me. I hope you had a blast, and I hope you learned something beneficial. And of course, I hope to see you again. Like I said, maybe we'll get that chance in a webinar in the future or through a lesson on the platform. Until then, everyone, stay safe and goodbye for now. Have a fantastic evening. Take care, everyone.